We're going to talk about the Quickfill on the BSA rifles, as found on the Ultras, Scorpions, Hornets, and various other models, the Gamma Dynamax. Anyway, the older models had a blued steel Quickfill, like this one, and then the newer models have a brass Quickfill like this one. I do have a video on my channel that shows how to service the new style. This video is about the older model, like this. There's a couple of different types of caps on your rifle. Obviously I've taken the cylinder off the rifle for this just to make it easier so you can see what I'm doing. Basically there's two types of cap. There's the tapered one and then there's a more sort of squarish one. That doesn't really make any difference, just pointing it out. If you have a look in here, there's a little ring with a couple of holes in it. Basically what you want to do is get something that fits into the fill port. This just happens to be a punch, but you could use anything, a big Allen key or even the fill probe that comes with the rifle, just to put in the hole and then tighten it. So go clockwise, just not much, quarter of a turn like you've seen I've done there, and then get something with a point on it into one of the holes in this ring, and then just undo it by going anti-clockwise. It's just a lock ring, and there we go. That's the ring out the way. Once that's done, you can then remove the fill port or fill valve or whatever you want to call it, the Quickfill. Got quite a deep thread on it. There we go. Get that out the way. Now, basically that is the old style, like I said, blued steel. There's an O-ring on there, and then there's an O-ring inside. So again, use your thing that you used previously, and then a big Allen key, which this happens to be a 6mm, and undo that. They sometimes have a little bit of Loctite on them. Basically remove that. It's basically a grub screw with a hole in it, and then just be careful with this next bit. You don't want to lose any pieces. There's a spring and a little brass plunger, and as you can see, that's probably why this one's leaking. There's bits of old O-ring from the fill probe caught in there, and they get bits of fluff and dirt and O-ring caught on the main O-ring, and then it doesn't seal, and then you start getting leaks. The other problem is when you fill, especially if you fill quickly, the whole fill valve gets hot, and heat destroys the nitrile rubber that they use for making the O-rings. That's one of the reasons why it's always a good idea to fill slowly when you fill your rifle. And I often get people saying to me, "Oh, you've sent me an O-ring," but there isn't actually an O-ring on mine. I've got it's like a plastic, almost like a plastic washer. Well, basically it is an O-ring, but it's got so hot that it's basically turned into almost, it looks like a hard sort of plastic, and they can be quite difficult to take off when that's happened. But it is actually an O-ring. It's just taken the shape of the hole that it sits in and gone hard because it's been overheated. That's the old O-ring taken off. That's the little plunger. Give it a good clean. Make sure it's all clean, no bits of fluff or dirt or anything on it. Then get your new O-ring, which obviously you can get from my online store. Pop that on and give that a clean. Make sure the spring's nice and clean, and then clean the actual port just to make sure that there's no other bits of, see it's a bit dirty in there. Give it a good clean. If you've got compressed air or canned air or whatever, just give it a blast just to blow out all the bits of rubbish. And once you're happy that that's all clean, you take your plunger, O-ring side down, drop it in, make sure it goes down into the hole, then your little spring, drop that onto the back of the plunger and just guide it on, make sure it's seated properly. And then take this, make sure it's clean as well, and screw that back in. Get your 6mm Allen key, screw that in, and just nip it up. It doesn't need to be gorilla tight. And just be aware that sometimes if you on some fill valves, this screw can actually screw in to the point where it holds the valve closed. So when you come to fill, the valve can't actually open because the grub screw's holding it closed. So just bear that in mind. If you go to fill your rifle and absolutely no air is coming out, going into the cylinder, then there is a chance that this has been over tightened. And then fitting it back is basically a reverse of taking it out. So I will say you can always put a drop of SM50 or something on the O-ring and on the threads, just to lube it up a bit, and then pop that in, screw it all the way in, and you'll notice it's fairly easy to screw in up until the point where the O-ring starts engaging on the inside of the cylinder, and then you'll feel it stiffen up, which is about there. And then get your probe or whatever and turn that. Don't go too mad. I mean, I've done one full turn, which means the O-ring's actually seated and should seal. I then take the locking ring and screw that on, and then get your pointy device again and screw it in some more. There we go. And that's basically, I've just locked the ring by doing that. And you should notice that if you try and undo this now, you can't, because the lock ring's locked it in place. But if you want to adjust it some more, then basically you do what we did in the beginning, and you actually turn this clockwise a bit, and then basically it unlocks the lock ring, which then lets you tighten it or loosen it. And again, when screwing this in, you don't have to screw it all the way in until it's tight. It doesn't work on how tight you screw this into the cylinder as to how well it'll seal. The sealing is done by the O-ring. The threads just hold it in place and stop it from shooting out. So you don't have to tighten this all the way. And you will find if you tighten this all the way, there's a good chance that the hole for the fill probe won't line up. So generally you'd have the barrel like that, and then you'd have the air cylinder below, and then your fill probe normally fills from the bottom. If you tighten this in all the way, you may find that suddenly your fill probe's off to the side or pointing up towards the barrel, so you can't actually get the fill probe into the fill port, and obviously that's going to be no good. So don't screw it in all the way until it stops and then crank it, because you're just going to create problems and it's really not necessary. So with that in mind, if you tighten it up and you've got it to there and you go, well, actually I don't want it kind of pointing at 45 degrees to the barrel, I'd rather have it pointing down a bit, then just use your probey thing, get it to where you want it, and then lock the lock ring there, just to make sure that it stays in place. And then once you fill the air cylinder with air, this won't move anyway. The air will lock it solid. There is absolutely no way you will move this once the air cylinder is full. And then obviously you can pop your cover back on and you're good to go. And there we go.